fear is the greatest excuse of them all, and it can be paralyzing. And to say overcoming your fears is easy, it's not true. So I don't believe I've overcome my fear. I'm afraid of snakes. I'm not going to go handle a snake. I'm deathly afraid of snake. I'm not going to bring it to my house. I don't want one as a pet, but I spend my weekends in swamps. So I've gotten where I can move beyond fear, and I don't allow fear to prevent me from living my life. And I think fear can be a healthy reminder sometimes. When I was afraid for my job last fall, because I wasn't doing it enough, right? If I'm afraid for my home, it's because I haven't saved enough. But if I'm like afraid of losing the life that I'm living, it's because I'm clinging on to something that's just outside of my control anyways. Fear is this thing that we tell ourselves that prevents us from taking that next step.
Hello, and welcome to episode 163 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review. That would mean a lot to me. Tell a friend about the podcast. Help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. After being thrown out of a Las Vegas hotel in a drunken haze, jeopardizing his career and relationships, Nick Klingensmith had to make a change. A 4-time cancer survivor, type 1 diabetic, recovering alcoholic, with herniated discs, nerve damage, and sleep apnea, he defied it all when he finds obstacle course racing. Refusing to accept his limitations, he's completed over 100 Spartan races, 6 major marathons, several ultras, and scores of other obstacle and endurance events. As someone who has walked the path of a sales professional, Nick is an expert in propelling other achievement-driven professionals and leaders to overcome fears and rejection and push past self-limiting doubts by inspiring them to take purposeful action towards their goals. Nick is a raw and passionate storyteller who holds nothing back when revealing who he used to be and the person he is now. All right. Well, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Nick. Nick, it's so great to have you on.
David, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're going to talk about your great story. And first, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey. Now you're a keynote speaker, best-selling author, and a life coach. How did you get there?
Now, I had to go through a lot, so I had something to say. The irony is that I wanted to be a writer since I was in the first grade. I always wanted to write something, and I wrote fiction throughout school as sort of a project, and I even tried to get something published in the early 2000s, and it didn't land at all. And then I really took a hiatus from writing, and the reason I mention that is because in the last 19 years I've had cancer 4 times. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I have 7 herniated discs from 2 different rollover fatality car accidents. I almost died from meningitis. I had COVID. There's probably something I'm leaving. I have sleep apnea. There's something I'm probably leaving out here. But I redefined and changed my life when I became an obstacle course racer. And when I was first introduced to Spartan Race, we're talking 7 years ago, it was something that I didn't want to do. I had no interest in really being that uncomfortable. And if you're not familiar with Spartan Race, think of a trail race with a lot of mud and a lot of obstacles. It's things like climbing over walls, hanging from various multi-rigs, climbing ropes, carrying heavy objects under barbed wire. Just think of the most uncomfortable thing you can do. Go put it on a race course and do it. And I signed up for this one race, and I had no idea that one little thing would begin to lead to another. And that ultimately throughout this process, I started taking back control over my life. And it was through that experience and then later writing about it that I was able to see the lessons of my life that really allowed me to complete my journey, or really to be part of my transformation.
Yeah, so with all the challenges you described, all the health challenges, what made you decide to start that?
When my boss walks into my office on a Friday afternoon and he goes, "I want to do a Spartan race and I want you to do it with me."
Okay.
And I looked at him. No. No. That sounded miserable to me. I had no intention of being that uncomfortable. And I went home that night and I was reflecting back upon all the stuff I had just told you. But then at that time, I had just been promoted at work. I had just started a new relationship with an amazing girl as my now wife. I had just beaten cancer decisively for the fourth time. And I somehow found myself stuck and lost. And it kind of occurred to me that I already was that uncomfortable. I hadn't overcome any of my adversity. I had only survived it. And so I knew I needed a change. I needed a catalyst, something to mix it up. And I think what was perfect about the race is it wasn't, he didn't say go be a Spartan racer with me and let's go run marathons. It was one race. It was a 10K-ish distance and it was 9 weeks away. So I didn't decide to change my life. I decided to do one uncomfortable thing, having no idea that it would change my life.
Had you ever done anything like that before?
I've run, at the time I might have been running 10 to 15 miles a week.
Okay.
I've done some 5Ks. I ran track in high school and I was a competitive beach volleyball player for nearly 20 years. But when I say competitive, I don't mean professional, and I didn't win anything. Well, that's not
Okay.
true. I won about $170 over those 20 years. So,
Okay. All right.
um, so I mean, I had done athletics, and so what it was is that I knew I knew I could be athletic. I knew I could live a life of fitness. I just needed the thing to get me started.
Okay. So that was your first.
That was the first.
And
And
then tell us about all the many others that you've done since.
well, let me first tell you a little bit about that first race. And
Yeah.
because there's a few key things that happened that day. Number one, when I'm walking to the race and I'm seeing other racers finish, they're jumping the fire, they're getting the medals, they're walking through the corral. Have you seen Gladiator?
Yeah.
Remember that first battle scene? And, afterwards, everyone's just kind of looking at Maximus as he's walking around with Caesar and just the amount of like respect. And you're looking at him like, wow, these warriors, right? That's how I saw these other racers. I mean, I just saw them coming off with mud and dirt and grit and badass written all over them. And I was like, wow, I'm going to go do this. I want what they had. So it gave me this immediate feeling of feeling like I was a warrior and not a victim. I wasn't living in a bubble that day, and I had before. The second thing is, and I'll ask you this, when was the last time you went out and played and weren't afraid of getting your pants dirty?
It might have been a while for me.
It's been a long time for most people, right? Well, I
Yeah.
can't tell you how liberating it was to just be out in the world, out in nature. Like, this isn't Busch Gardens, man. When I'm running through a swamp, there's gators in that swamp. There's snakes, things I'm afraid of. When I'm climbing mountains, I mean, we're not taking the lift to the top, we're climbing the mountain. And to just go out there and without fear, without doubt, without reservation, without thinking what society's telling us to do and just play like a kid again. Oh my God, the spiritual reset you hit. And then at the end of the race, well, actually throughout the race, especially when I'm not a great athlete or anything, but when I achieved like or accomplished that one obstacle that I didn't think was something I could do, it was like it was redefining. So here I was, I went out in the race and I basically just ripped open any expectation of what I thought life was. And now all of a sudden I started redefining even what I believed I was capable of. And so when I finished that race and I just looked back, it was this feeling of serenity that had come over me in a way that I had yet to experience. And I remember the next day sitting out on the water out at Flagler Beach outside on the east coast of Florida, having breakfast with my wife, and it was the newness of it. It was literally like day one of my new life. And so when I went back to work the next day, my boss and I, who again, I thought it was a one and done race, I went into his office this time. We got up on his whiteboard and we started planning the next year. And every race presents a unique obstacle or a unique opportunity to inspire yourself and to learn something about yourself. Because it might be the obstacle that you overcome for the first time, that race that you run your best, your best time in. It might be the fear that you overcome. There's just so many different things out there that you get that taste of achievement and inspires you to go chase more. And that's really what it's been, is that I didn't just say, I'm going to go run 100 Spartan races. It was just, what's next? And what do I learn now? And how do I get better at this? And what skills do I develop? And the thing is that training for these races, it's it's training for life. Because yes, I'm doing physical activity. That's one thing, obviously, right? But like at the same time, it requires purposeful intention. Like you have to be very purposeful with your time. You have to learn things. It's not just a physical game. So you learn things about the obstacle, you learn things about yourself. It's a process for overcoming obstacles, and it's the same process as obstacles that we face in life.
Did you have to change some training for that first one? You said you had 9 weeks. Did you do some different training than you had been?
Yeah, I mean, because I hadn't been doing much. I've been running a little here and there, doing a couple push-ups here and there.
Yeah.
In my book, I describe my training program prior to Spartan Race as uh, scribbled notes on a coffee napkin, almost like a task list that will never be completed. It was just miscellaneous jargon. And so what I did for the Spartan Race, since I had no idea how to train for it. Now, these days, all of the information you need about Spartan is online and through social media communities. I mean, you can learn literally everything. Back then, though, there was a lot of mystery behind it, and they just wanted you to train for everything. And the CEO of Spartan even had written a couple books, and a lot of it were about mindset. And he's an incredible marketer, I'll tell you that. And I was buying because I really wanted the mindset shift as well of just doing hard things and getting uncomfortable. So I actually found like a 30-day training program called Couch to Sprint. The sprint is a 5K distance obstacle course race. The one I was training for was a 10K, which actually turned out to be about 8.5 miles. And so I took the 30-day training program. Now, again, I wasn't on the couch though. I was an intermediate or beginner, you know, hybrid athlete, if you will. And
Right.
so I took that and I just ratcheted it up. I followed the program for about a week, but the program was like had some walk runs in there, walk for 3 minutes, run for one, stuff like that. After the first week, I just said, okay, well, I can just run for 10 minutes straight. And so I started ratcheting it up. And that's what I did over the 9 weeks is I trained everything and I conditioned my body not to necessarily perform or excel during the obstacle course race, but really just to prepare it to get through it.
Yeah. So you mentioned your book. I'm going to read the whole title here. So, Through the Fire, the story of the four-time cancer survivor, type 1 diabetic, and recovering alcoholic that became an obstacle course racer and defied it all. So tell us about your book and what made you decide to write that. You said you'd always wanted to write.
Yeah, and I love to write. So something I don't haven't actually talked to a lot of people about, but I was a private investigator for 20 years. My dad was a cop. He was a PI. I used to work for him, and I like writing a lot of fiction. And so I actually started writing like a series about a private investigator on Martha's Vineyard, where I'm originally from. And the thing is, as much as I love writing, I never really committed to writing that series of the books. And over the years, starting in like 2017 and 2018, I call this Facebook therapy, but I would do a Facebook post about whatever was ailing me and how I was overcoming it. So if I was doing a cancer check at Moffitt Cancer Center, I might be like, F you, cancer, I'm coming to get you. I'll start writing things like that. And then when I finished a race, I'm like, I might write about, my herniated discs and how I did this and how I can overcome it. I didn't realize that I was basically writing speeches and writing little blurbs that other people would resonate with. It was really just sort of a self-talk way to put it out in the atmosphere. And what ended up happening later throughout 2018, as I was really into the mainstream of this life, is people were reaching out to me and they were telling me that I was inspiring them and they're telling me I should write my story. And I hadn't occurred to me yet until I sat down literally at the end of that year and I just started writing. And I realized the reason I keep mentioning those fiction novels is I go, I have the whole story now. I have something to write about. I even told my boss back in 2020 when I was working on revising the book, I was having a bad day with diabetes. And he was like, I'm sorry. And I go, I'm not. And he goes, why not? I go, because this is why I get to write a book. Like it was the thing that had happened to me provided me the thing that I wanted to do. So I just started writing. I would sit down, grab a legal pad, think of a scene from my life or a scene from the races, and I would just start writing about it. And so the first draft was a 125,000 word. mindless manifesto. It was everything from like a history of Spartan. It was a training journal. It was a how-to. Um, I had positioned myself as like a fitness expert. I mean, it was just this ego-driven movie poster that had nothing to do with what I had gone through. And so nobody was going to read a 500-page memoir about somebody they'd never heard about. Obviously, I had to edit it. And so as I'm going through the exercise, and it took me about a year of doing this, of just slashing and cutting and cutting and cutting, you eventually begin to strip away the bullshit you've been telling yourselves. You begin to start seeing through the lies, and you begin to start seeing things in a different perspective. And this was a critical part of my journey for me because, when we talk about introversion and whatnot too, it's like these are the times where I truly embraced being alone in that solitude. And it wasn't like I didn't want to be around other people. I was embracing the things that I was doing. Like this is what that was my spiritual like time. It was meditative to be able to do all that. And throughout that process, then that's when I began to realize the lessons from my life and understood that I then have a gift that I can help share with other people. And so I published a book, which was probably the scariest thing I'd ever done in my life because of just how naked and vulnerable I truly went through the whole exercise. And the feedback I got from people then was remarkable. Not praising me, telling me their stories. I mean, the occasional praise is fine, but I've never really been comfortable with it. Like everybody likes a little validation, but it's kind of like I don't know, I want the quiet validation. I want to know, but I don't really want you to tell me because then I'm going to feel uncomfortable about it. So the real the real power came when people reached out to me and told me their story and how I inspired them to share theirs or to write a book, or they told me about cancer, they told me about their addiction. And that's truly what helped to transform my life. And also, when I said I realized I hadn't overcome my adversity, I'd only survived it. It was then that I realized that not only have I overcome my adversity, but that I can now overcome any adversity.
So in that, you did mention introversion, and you are a fellow introvert. So just tell us just a little bit about how did you figure that out, and how did you learn to embrace it?
I'm going to be candid. The nail on the head was our conversation because
Okay,
I'd never thought about it in the way that we talked about.
okay.
Um, so I was talking to my old boss a little while back. He's a good friend of mine, and he knew me when I was drinking. Like he's been friends for almost 20 years now. And I was telling him how when I was becoming a motivational speaker, I was like, hey, maybe I get to start being more social again. And he's like, why? I'm like, because I spend, I train by myself for 3 hours a day. If I have free time, I work on my book or I write. And so on the weekends, I like to get up, do a long run, go to the dog park, come back, write. And by then, I don't want to go be social and do things. I'm sort of done for the day. I always choose that type of activity. And I was telling him that, well, hey, now that it's my full-time job to write my books and work on my creative stuff, maybe I'll be able to free up some more personal time. I'm yet to make that decision. And it's because I realize it's not that I don't like being around people. It's I prefer these activities that allow me to use what I have. I have this cognitive ability. I have this creativity. I have these things that I can do that I can really flourish on when I'm in the right environment. And I had to realize there's actually a line from a reggae song, and this is what first put it in my head. I don't know if you ever listened to the band Revolution. Um, I don't remember the word for word, but he was like, what's wrong with just sitting back and just writing? That was the sentiment of the lyric. And I was like, seriously, what's wrong with that? Why do I have to feel like I'm supposed to do something and be something else? Like I'm enjoying myself. I'm not hiding, right? Like I'm not isolating. And that's what I used to think it was, is that isolating. And I realized that's not the same thing. I keep very close personal relationships. It's funny this week with the social media going down a couple times. Um, I realized something too, that I appear like an extrovert to so many people because I am social, but those are so surface level connections. Like the things on there's a difference between sort of being that social and really enjoying the lots of people and being the life of the party. But that's what got me drunk. When I was out there drinking all the time, the only time I really enjoy being the life of the party and just being at the center of everything, I had to get drunk to deal with it. And I just didn't realize that. So I know I'm going around in circles here, but that's because this is a brand new process of just learning these things and then seeing that I've been this way my entire life, even as a child. B, it's not what I thought it was. I believe there's probably a big misconception between this concept of introversion and extroversion, and then lastly is just embracing it. And like I said, it was like our conversation when you and I spoke, it really just kind of put a couple things in perspective. And I go, okay, not only am I this way, I like being this way, and I can use this for a lot of good things.
Yeah, well said there, Nick. You have a gift. It came to you naturally. It's something you've always had. I've always been an introvert. We like people, it's just, we need our time to use our gifts. We enjoy our time to use our gifts. When there's just a balance there, but we have important people in our lives that we like to spend time with. But it's all a balance, and it's not good or bad. It just, we have some great gifts that we need to share. So yeah, that's amazing. So this is still pretty recent for you to this understanding.
What's crazy? When I putting out the book really changed everything for me. And, I get so naked in the book. I mean, I open the second chapter with, me getting thrown out of a Vegas hotel for trying to have sex with a hooker in a closet while my girlfriend is sleeping down the hall. That's pretty vulnerable to put that scumbag level of yourself out there. I talk about how scared I was when I got cancer. I talk about how I just bawled when I lost my cat, and how I'm still trying to process when I lost my mom. Putting these things out there and just being so vulnerable to the world, because I mean, it's easier to put them out there when you aren't looking people in the eye. When I can write a book or I can take a video and I'm not having to see the people's reaction. But I've come to embrace vulnerability as a superpower. And because of that, and being willing to be humble and being willing to call out my own faults, the first 2 years I was sober, it was all about looking back and just kind of cleaning up my wreckage of my personality and some of the damage that I might have caused. But I almost think I shut that valve off after that for several years, because now I'm looking back at years 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of being sober, and I'm seeing things different than I saw now. And I'm all these lessons just keep pouring in. And so I've just been in this self-reflective journey here for a little while, and I'm learning so much about myself that I hadn't before. So the floodgates are just pouring in. And it's almost like when I stopped drinking, I knew I was an alcoholic for a long time. It wasn't about accepting it. It was just about when I was ready to do something about it. So I think this is something that I've known about myself. I'm just now embracing it, and now I'm getting comfortable with it and learning more about myself instead of trying to force myself into a different box.
Yeah, that's the key. Really being your true self. And on that reflection, that's a gift you have. As introverts, we have a gift to think about where we're at, where we want to be, how we want to be better, and it's a gift.
I've also, because of like self-reflection, and this is I'm coaching a guy right now on he's a sales guy. And he's kind of hit a bit of a wall. And what I've realized as a career sales professional and someone who used to consider myself a barstool salesperson, meaning that like I was, again, life of the party type person. But I look back at all the sales training I do. I look back at the way that I coach people to do sales. And I even look at the book I'm writing right now on sales. And I realize how much I have taken myself out of the process. I talk about math over emotion, just, effort over outcomes. Like we are the vehicle. I don't need to live and die by every sale. I don't need to hang on to every person's reaction to me or validation to me. Basically, I've created this process that is not about me. And because I realize when I'm living and dying by every other person's reaction and approval, dude, it's exhausting. It's exhausting, and it gets almost impossible to do your job unless you're someone who truly thrives in that environment where you have to be surrounded by, well, people all the time. Like, it's exhausting to force yourself into that box. But the more that I'm able to disconnect myself from the outcome, you have to know your process, you have to know your building blocks. But the more that I take my ego out of it, the more that I take my personality out of it, the more that I realize it's not a judgment about me and I am just executing a process. I can do more without it taking away my mental stamina.
Yeah, that's great. So all these things you learned, now you're speaking, you're a coach, you're a life coach. How do you bring these concepts to others through your speaking and your coaching?
Well, the speaking, I share my story into great detail. And I really talk about certain defining moments. And again, this is something that you don't realize when you're in the moment. And but going through it all, I go through my story and then I take the most relevant lessons that really apply to building resilience. And these are things that apply to everybody. One of the feedback I get a little bit is a lot of people don't know what obstacle course racing is. A lot of people know what it is, look at it like a hobby or a game, and that's fine. It is for some people. It's hard to translate that lesson that no, I'm not going to come in and talk about sports. Like, again, the process for overcoming obstacles in the woods is the exact same as in life. And I'm going to give you a real example real quick. When I lost my job in October, that's the exact same thing as me looking at an obstacle called the Olympus wall, which is a slanted wall that you have to traverse horizontally, and it's got these little small holes, and it's got rock climbing grips, and it's slippery, and it's one of the hardest obstacles there is. It's the exact same thing as losing a job, because the first thing you have to do is say, what does overcoming the obstacle look like? What is success? You have to define the obstacle, right? So for me in the Olympus wall, it's getting to the other side, hitting the bell. When you lose a job, it's like, okay, well, generating revenue. How do I get there? And then we just have to look at ourselves and say, where am I weak? Where am I strong? What are the things I need to work on? What skills, knowledge, strength do I need to get in order to overcome this thing? And then it becomes a matter of planning and preparation. So the lessons in resilience apply universally. Now, coaching is a little bit different because I want to get more tactical. And the way that I help people specifically when it comes to coaching, and this is both for sales teams or just individual professionals, is most people do not know how to define their goals. Uh, Most of the people I've been talking to, and I've been talking to a lot of people, are giving me these vague goals like, I want to get promoted as many times as I can. I want to be a best dad. I'm going to be a better husband. Congratulations. You have failed on all three. You can't set emotional goals and expect to have a tangible objective. So I'm working with them on taking these vague, concepts, these life visions, and turning them into something tangible and actionable, and then defining a plan that helps them to achieve their goals. And then I simply kind of transition to an accountability partner. But if you look at, again, my life and the things I've done, one of the key lessons I've learned is about personal responsibility. I am responsible for everything in my life that happens from this moment forth. I may not be at fault, I may not be to blame, but I am responsible. I remove excuses, I remove doubt, I remove fear, because none of those things matter. All that matters is pushing us to take that next step and removing those barriers. So that's how I'm working with individuals, everything from helping them to get their careers back on track, overcoming personal trauma to take back some of their own life. The process really is kind of the same.
And how do you help people find what their purpose is so that they can make those goals?
So, there's a purpose for doing something and a life purpose, right? Like our purposes can evolve. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. Like, so the first guy that I'm coaching, that's exactly where he got stuck. He's a director in he's reached director level in he's in telecom sales. He's been there for a long time. He knows he's hit a ceiling in his industry unless he goes and works for another startup, which he doesn't want to do. So he's achieved some levels of success. He recently got married, got a new house. He's really checked a lot of boxes lately, and now he's like, yeah, I need a kick in the ass. And as I'm talking to him, and I was like, all right, well, what's your purpose here? What's your why? What are we working for? And he gave me this nonsense about saving for retirement, blah, blah, blah. Basically, he's like, I'm going to work till I'm 65, and then I'm going to take a vacation with my wife and yada, yada, and golf on Sundays. I'm like, dude, shut up. I'm like, if any of those things were true, you wouldn't be on the phone with me right now.
Right.
That's what got you here, but it's not driving you anymore. So it starts with I almost want to say like a therapy conversation, because we have to get naked and vulnerable and find out what is in the next part of your life. It's sometimes we know we don't know how to articulate it, but more often than not, we just don't know what we want to do. So for him in particular, we were basically able to articulate the fact that he doesn't want to wait 20 years to start traveling with his wife. So cool. I'm like, let's put some dates on the calendar. Let's find out some locations. Let's find out how much it's going to cost. Like, let's plan it out and then drive you there. Because then if he can connect his daily activity with the purpose of traveling the world, dude, I can stand on my head for 10 hours a day if it means I'm going to go experience the rest of the world and get to travel the world and share that experience with another person. So, another guy who experienced some trauma, he had injured himself and then he basically became like isolated, like afraid to walk, afraid to shower, afraid to do anything that requires him to use his leg, including walking his dog. That's the part that was breaking his heart. Not living his life is one thing. That wasn't enough to get him going. But when we really broke it down to the fact that, like, dude, your dog is sad. Like, we're going to get you walking or you're going to have to give him up. Like, he's like, hey, I can't do that. And I go, all right. So now we know what we need to do. Like, this is an important why. And as a dog owner, number one, I wasn't going to let him give him up. I just want him to know the alternative.
Right.
Like, we're going to get you going here. He got walking that day. Like, we're still working on bigger goals and getting back into life because, you can hit these setbacks real easy. But like, he literally would not go outside his house. And I suggested he just go on a 10-foot walk, and he sent me video of him walking back and forth with his dog in the backyard. I was like, I win, because my purpose is to overcome every obstacle and inspire others they can too. So when I saw that I inspired him to overcome that obstacle, that's like me ringing the bell that day.
Awesome. And so still people might get their purpose, have their goals, but be afraid of doing that. How do you help people push past those limiting beliefs that they might have?
Yeah. The first part, though, I'm going to keep going back to the why and the purpose.
Okay.
Um, Resilience thrives when there is a sense of purpose. I walk through fear when I have a sense of purpose. Your excuses don't have the same power over you when you have a sense of purpose. Now, that said, we have to put things into perspective because fear is the greatest excuse of them all. Excuses are one thing, okay? Like, as a matter of fact, the newest client I brought up yesterday, I was really proud of him because he told me all these things that were sort of wrong yesterday. And then I was like, man, you're growing already. And he's like, how do you know that? I go, because you didn't offer one excuse, not one. And here's what I like to say. I've called Wells Fargo before, and I said, hey, I don't have any money, but I got a lot of excuses for you. No, you don't accept excuses for mortgage payments? Oh, they have no value. None. So it doesn't matter. They are 100% bullshit. They are a lie that you are telling yourself. So just like, honestly, I'm going to be a dick about it. Shut up. There's no excuse I'm willing to hear. You are responsible. Now, as far as fear is the greatest excuse of them all, and it can be paralyzing. And to say overcoming your fears is easy, it's not true. So I don't believe I've overcome my fear. I'm afraid of snakes. I'm not going to go handle a snake. I'm deathly afraid of snake. I'm not going to bring it to my house. I don't want one as a pet, but I spend my weekends in swamps. So I've gotten where I can move beyond fear, and I don't allow fear to prevent me from living my life. And I think fear can be a healthy reminder sometimes. When I was afraid for my job last fall, because I wasn't doing it enough, right? If I'm afraid for my home, it's because I haven't saved enough. If I'm like afraid of losing the life that I'm living, it's because I'm clinging on to something that's just outside of my control anyways. Fear is this thing that we tell ourselves that prevents us from taking that next step. I actually fear effort. I do. My favorite run, my go-to exercise is a long, slow run. I'd rather run for 4 hours at like a low heart rate than train hard for 20 minutes. So today, for example, I had to go out and do a high intensity workout. I was actually afraid of it. We just have to step into fear, because every time that we do, we see that it doesn't have any power. The only power fear has is the power that we give it. And it doesn't mean that every fear is unfounded. You should fear the hot flame over the stove. You should fear playing in traffic. But I'm going to tell you that if you look back over your life, and I'm going to make up a stat because why not? 99% of the fears you've ever had never manifested. And the reason I know this because we found no monsters in the closet, no boogeymen under the bed. I'm still here. I'm still breathing. I still have my home. I was terrified of losing my job. That was 5 months ago. And instead, I'm kicking ass at a new career. Like there's all these things that we are afraid of, we make up in here. Its only power source is here. And so we're the only ones who can do something about it.
Yeah. So how would you sum that up? What's the way that we overcome our fears? How would you put that in a nutshell?
Chase your fears. Don't face them, chase them. Literally do what scares the shit out of you. Find something that you're afraid of and go do it. And I'm going to encourage people to start small, because the reason that most people won't do it is, like, if you're afraid of heights, you probably don't need to go skydiving today. All right. But you could stand on the third step of a ladder. All right. If I'm afraid of snakes, I can go for a walk in the park, walk in the grass. It's not about overcoming the fear. It's just simply about opening up the space that we live in and not allowing fear to interfere with it. So if there's something you're afraid of, go find out if it's worth being afraid of. If you don't believe me about the hot flame over the stove, hold your hand over it. Let's find out what's worth being afraid of. Chase your fears, because that's what living is. That's what that entire first race was for me. I was afraid of everything out there, and it was the most liberating experience I could have imagined.
I love that. I love that. I'm afraid of snakes too, and I'm not going in the swamp. So I'm not overcoming my fear of the swamp.
I didn't overcome it. I pushed past it. And that's because
Okay.
my why puts me out there. Yours may
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
There
I'm gonna overcome some different fears. So
you
anyway,
go.
that's great. Nick, you have such a great story. I love how you also talked about how you embraced your introversion. Is there anything else that you want to share today?
Yeah, absolutely. I love leaving people with this, which is this: live inspired. I close every one of my videos with it, and I mean it. It's to live inspired means to look for inspiration, and inspiration is everywhere. If we're talking about stepping out of our comfort zones, if we're talking about stepping out of fear, right? Every time that I do, it's a high five. Like, so go meet that one other person. Go do that one thing that scares you. Go do that one thing that's uncomfortable. Do something to challenge yourself and inspire yourself. If you're somebody who's having trouble getting off the couch, don't look at me and all my medals and say I need to do that. Just go for a walk. Nothing inspires progress like progress.
Great. That's great. We've had such a great conversation, Nick. How can people find out more about the work that you do?
My website is www.stridemotivation.com. I am everywhere on social media at Stride Motivation, and I'd love to hear from some people.
All right. That sounds great. Again, Nick, thanks for being on the show and for this wonderful conversation.
Thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts, links to social media, and other items. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the four-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.